The Japanese fury over Assassin's Creed Shadows is not dying down, even after Ubisoft attempted to address a lot of the issues that Japanese players are having. In fact, I think they might have fanned the flames even further with their corporate and insincere statement. Before we get to this, I'd like to ask you please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you don't miss any of our notifications here at the Trent Report. Also, hit that like button so we beat the YouTube algorithm and more people see this video. Joining me to discuss this is The Blaze's Andrew Chapados. He is a writer over there at The Blaze for sports and gaming. Glad to welcome him to the channel. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, John. Thank you for having me. And thank you for pronouncing my name correctly without even asking me. I think it's straightforward. Everybody always asks, how do you pronounce your name? But you did it impeccably, if that's the right word.
I'll take that. I just it's how it's spelled.
Thank you. Thank you. It's what I say.
So let's get into this here, though. I know you've been covering this over at The Blaze. I've obviously been covering this here at thatparkplace.com. And the Japanese people are not happy with what's happening here with Assassin's Creed Shadows. So much so that Ubisoft actually had to address an entire statement to them that they posted on their website, that they posted on the official Assassin's Creed account on X, where they basically talk about how our game is actually fiction. They concede that Yasuke, it's disputed that Yasuke is actually a samurai after the Japanese have like dug up that this Thomas Lockley guy was editing Wikipedia. He's editing Encyclopedia Britannica. He's trying to do this to like sell his book that has basically been peddled as as like actual history, even though it is a historical fiction. And it seems like Ubisoft was basing a lot of their information about Yasuke on his books and his works and things, and then seemingly maybe even potentially collaborated with him. I don't know if that's actually been confirmed or not yet. There's a lot of speculation on that. So basically, like we'll go down here and look at this last post here, because I think it's like the real where the meat of it is here. It says the representation of Yasuke in our game is an illustration of this. His unique and mysterious life made him an ideal candidate to tell an Assassin's Creed story with the setting of feudal Japan as a backdrop. While Yasuke is depicted as a samurai in Assassin's Creed Shadows, we acknowledge that this is a matter of debate and discussion. We'll get to this a little bit later, but they were clearly marketing this guy as a real samurai. I think we've got a blog post that we'll look at that literally describes him as real life samurai, etc. We're going to get some other interviews here too with the game's director saying that you can learn the history of the Sengoku era of Japan from this game, also indicating that he is it's all historical, etc. So they go on here and say, we have woven this carefully into our narrative and with our other lead character, the Japanese shinobi Naui, who is equally important in the game. Our dual protagonists provide players with different gameplay styles. We greatly value your feedback and encourage you to continue sharing your thoughts respectfully. While we understand that meeting everyone's expectations is very difficult, we sincerely hope that when Assassin's Creed launches on November 15, players in Japan and around the world will appreciate the dedication, effort, and passion we have poured into it. And I do want to go back up here because I think they do actually they issue an apology, but they don't apologize for anything that they do. It's right here. Yeah. It says, despite these sustained efforts, we acknowledge that some elements in our promotional materials have caused concern with the Japanese community. For this, we sincerely apologize. So they're not apologizing for anything that they've done. They're apologizing for the concern that they've caused within the Japanese community. And Japanese players responded to this post. They posted this on their Ubisoft Japan account, and a lot of them were just like, what? Like, this is crap. So here's one guy right here. He says, I think the story about Yasuke should be just be considered fiction. Based on Yasuke, the issue of historical retelling is no longer a Ubisoft issue, but a Lockley issue. However, Yasuke is no longer the problem. The plagiarism of materials from manga organizations and cultural heritage sites, the misinterpretation of Japanese history, and the misinterpretation of Japanese as Chinese, among other things, show disregard for Japan. The problem is these. So they obviously addressed the Yasuke thing in that statement, but we've got this guy right here is pointing out like, well, there's all these other problems. Are you going to address those as well? What do you kind of make of that?
I think what they're doing here is almost as if like they said you could learn about Italian history and culture from Super Mario. I really do, because Ubisoft is so woke and they do this so often where they pander to certain genders, of course, and nationalities and backgrounds, that it's almost like they're willing to go to great lengths to criticize other people for not being inclusive or whatever. But as soon as they do something to another culture, they don't even care. Like, if you read their apology, they completely talk out of both sides of their mouth in each sentence. They'll say, "Yeah, well, we made it very authentic, and parts of the game are so authentic, and you can experience this era of Japanese history, but also it's artistic license. We're just taking creative license with this." And then they'll go on to say, "Well, you can learn about this, and we've worked with so many historians and so many researchers across the country and in Japan itself. But at the end of the day, our characters and our story are still fictional." So they want to hold on to this idea that they didn't make any mistakes, that they did properly follow the history and the culture of Japan. But then once they're proven wrong about things, which is pretty much the entire game, Japanese players are pointing out, they're just like, "Well, we're allowed to basically do whatever we want, even though we're a super woke organization. And if somebody else did this, it'd be cultural appropriation," which, of course, I don't believe in. But I think Ubisoft has probably been getting away with this for a while. They just sort of picked on the wrong people. They sort of tried to exploit the background and the culture of a group of people who completely care about the depiction of their background and their culture in media. Whereas if they were to, you know, talk about something from England or depict, a black Julius Caesar or something, people might not stand up for it. But people in Japan actually care about this stuff, and they're not going to just let a Canadian company like this abuse or just profit off of their image like so many of these companies do. And if we circle back to somebody like Sweet Baby Inc. And games they've helped produce, they're happy to profit off of DEI and injecting woke storylines into thing and manipulating storylines. But when somebody points it out, they really don't like that it's being pointed out to them. So they're happy to profit off of it. But now Japan's just like, this has actually gone too far. That's how I'm taking it. It's how they finally come up to an opponent in the Japanese people that's actually going to stand up for themselves.
Yeah, and just to go off of that Sweet Baby Inc. thing, the CEO of Sweet Baby Inc., Kim Belair, was a former employee at Ubisoft for a number of years too. So there is a deep, deep connection there between Ubisoft and Sweet Baby Inc. There, I'm glad you brought that up there. We also have a couple other people here. This person here says, "Thanks to your company, I was able to become aware of the historical changes being made by the forces of globalization against Japan. Thank you very much." So this person here is even pointing out that there might be something more insidious happening, that this game is, as you talk about, they're talking out both sides of their mouths, but maybe the purpose of the game, as you said, with Sweet Baby Inc., is to try and wokeify Japanese culture, try and inject that woke ideology, create that division, try and kind of attack that Japanese culture, attack that Japanese history, as we've seen them do throughout the West. Here, what do you kind of make of that? I always point to this line from the Last Jedi that Kylo Ren says, "Let the past die, kill it if you have to," and I feel like that's kind of their motto. That how these people operate, they are intentionally doing that, and I think this guy's onto this here, that Ubisoft was doing this intentionally to try and rewrite Japanese history, to kind of inject this woke ideology into it and try maybe erode the fabric of their society. What do you think about that?
I think for several years now, people like this, and by people I mean the wokesters, if you can use that term, at Ubisoft, and Crystal Dynamics is another one, and of course, Sweet Baby Inc. and their ilk. They've had trouble over the years convincing people from Japan and people from China and South Korea that they should be victims. They've had trouble convincing East Asians that they should succumb to this mind virus, if we're going to keep using these terms, of leftism, and they don't exactly play along with it. So I do believe that there's some reasoning behind this, that they would want to try to include these people. They've tried to do it for a long time. They do it in Hollywood, where they come out with this specifically Asian storylines and say, it's because we're underrepresented in this culture and in this genre. And you bring up Star Wars, and I believe his name is Manny Jacinto, who is in Acolyte. He is subscribing to this sort of thing, where he said that Tom Cruise making Top Gun all about Tom Cruise is indicative of white people essentially making movies for themselves, and Asians need to make movies for themselves. So there is an effort in the entertainment industry to try to wokeify Asian cultures who don't normally subscribe to this. And I think this is one of those efforts. I think they just got caught in a bear trap, so to speak. They put their, they weren't thinking. They thought that they were just going to make a 6'8" jacked Japanese samurai who's a black guy who's going to go in and save the world. And they show in the trailers he's getting the Japanese training and everything. And of course, there's no evidence that any of this happened. And we can get into the actual history that people are now learning about thanks to Ubisoft. So maybe they'll come out and say, hey, we actually did get you guys to learn about the history, but in fact, it is them just trying to exploit it for their own gain. So yeah, I do think there's something to be said here for where they're choosing to derive their storylines from.
Right, and we know that Yasuke is the first time they've actually used a real historical figure. I don't think there's any dispute about that. He is indeed real. He's part of the historical record of Japan, and that's the first time you actually can. He's a historical figure is a main character in one of their games. Usually, they're always fictional characters too. I think that is something to point out. And usually, I think this is also the first time where you have a character who isn't actually from the location where the game is set as well. Obviously, they do have Naoi, who is from Japan, but even when you go back to, I think it was like Unity, where it's set in London, you have I think it's the brother and sister there. They're obviously both from England there too. So I think there's a lot of it's more than just a coincidence, right? More than just a coincidence here. So a lot of people kind of said something similar to this. It's so roundabout that I don't know what you're trying to say. I think that gets back to your point that you're saying they were kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth. And they were. Let's kind of get into this here and how they actually talked about this previously. This is an interview over on Xbox Wire that the game's director, Charles Benoit, conducted with the outlet. And he actually admits here that we're showing real historical figures such as Oda Nobunaga and a lot of events that happened during that time. So you're not only playing in feudal Japan, but learning about this fantastic time period. So he's literally saying here that you are indeed learning about what the actual historical facts were in this game.
Are they going to include all the bad stuff? That's what I want to know. Even if they got their stuff from Wikipedia and the, like, what is it, 4 documents that are out and, confirmed of their authenticity about Yasuke, are they going to include all this horrible stuff about how, they were so shocked that about seeing a black person for the first time that people were paying to see what he looked like? Are they going to include the part about, checking to see if his skin wasn't painted on because they weren't used to seeing black people? Are they going to talk about the part where he actually fought in something, which is where a lot of this is derived from, I'd imagine, where he actually was defending a palace, I believe it was, and then his life was spared because somebody said he had the intelligence of an animal because he was black? This is not me saying it. This is the documents, some of which were derived from, the writings of, I believe, Portuguese missionaries in the area who saw a lot of this. Are they going to include these horrible things? Of course not. What are they going to include? We all know, and they can.
Seen it.
Pardon?
We've already seen it. He's going around killing people that are forced into fighting him. He's chopping their heads off and executing them as he's doing a little dance to a hip hop song.
Ubisoft can try to defend this if they want, John, but they never will, of course. And the reason they did this is because they thought it would be cool, and they thought people would think that they're good people for making a black guy be a samurai and be a cool samurai. This is why they did it. It's no other reason. And again, they can try. I'll argue with them about this, and they can try to defend it and try to say where this story came from. They wanted to just make up this story. They thought they were going to get away with it, and they stepped on the wrong foot. They did the wrong thing, and now they're going to have to pay for it because they've never had to pay for it before. They've never had somebody be like, "Hey, you're actually full of it." When Crystal Dynamics, and I forget the new company that brought it to life for this generation, when they were remaking Lara Croft, and then making this board game calling her a colonizer, there's nobody that there's no one person or group that can be, hey, this is completely ridiculous. With this game, they claimed it was authentically Japan, they claimed it was authentic history, and they messed up. And hopefully their wallets will pay for it.
Yeah, and it's not just this interview here. I mean, this is a blog post on Ubisoft's website, that one of the original blog posts when they were kind of doing their initial marketing for this game earlier this year. I mean, you can see right here, they're describing him as a real life samurai right there. And we go on, and if you want to read this part here, it says the fascinating facts, though, were indisputable. Of African origin, he arrived in Japan enslaved by the Portuguese. He impressed with size, strength, and wits. He served under the Japanese daimyo Oda Nobunaga. There must have been something exceptional about Yasuke to succeed in the service of a personality like Nobunaga's, the team explains. And the goal has been to expound on this in Assassin's Creed Shadows through his curiosity, openness, respect for values and tradition, valor, warmth, and charisma. He also offers a unique perspective on the period. Players can discover Japan alongside him. On one
None
hand,
of that means none of that means he's a samurai though. Where like their own explanation, they're like he's a samurai, and then they go on to say nothing about him being a samurai. At best, how would you describe it, John? A man at arms, a squire, a helper, like none of.
retainer is probably what I've seen most people
And then
describe him
there's no depictions of him as a samurai. There's a depiction of a black guy sumo wrestling. They just like they're saying like he's a samurai, but we can't really prove that. But don't worry about that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big issues, obviously, that the Japanese people have. Obviously, we went over a bunch of other ones. They're mixing Japanese culture with with Chinese culture. They've got a lot of the how the characters sit is wrong. The architecture is wrong. How the seasons are is wrong. They just got a lot. They got like a lot wrong. Obviously, I think Yasuke is probably the biggest example of what they got wrong, and I think that's because they've tried to kind of backtrack on a lot of this stuff. They initially came out with a statement that I know a lot of Japanese people kind of took to heart, where Yves Guillemot, who is the CEO of Ubisoft, issued this statement about like malicious comments and things like that. And I think a lot of Japanese people thought that was directed at them, and it probably was in part directed at them. Obviously, I think it was directed at people like me and you as well that have been calling this stuff out here in the West. But I wanted to get back to this here real quick because it says here, he also offers a unique perspective on the period. Players can discover Japan alongside him. On one hand, he serves as a warning for the colonizing threat that the Portuguese present. And on the other, he adapted and thrived in Japan and can be viewed as an example of the meritocratic structure established under Nobunaga. In Assassin's Creed Shadows, his historical story is established and then developed and expanded from that point. The team won't spoil how he's linked to Assassin's Creed lore. Players will have to play the game to find out. I know that there's some rumors that are completely disregarding the actual history and saying that he like arrives washed up on the shore from a slave ship that crashed or whatever, which is not how he actually arrived. So if that's the case, they're lying in this blog post too. But this is something I think Japanese players have taken an issue with here as well, is the fact that they're saying that you can discover Japan alongside him. We had this here from a Japanese YouTuber Shoei Kondo, pointing to a Famitsu article, which again was kind of part of that initial media blitz, where the developers of Assassin's Creed here, one of the Ubisoft people said, with Yasuke, I was first looking for a character who could be seen by us as a samurai, someone who is not Japanese. So they clearly had this intention to use Yasuke because he's not a Japanese character that they could describe as a samurai. And I think that goes back to like what we were just talking about here, is what this guy is saying, that it is changes being made by the forces of globalization.
Well, you look at that blog post they wrote, right? And that you were just reading about the Portuguese colonizers. Where does that come from? Did Portugal ever have a colony in Japan? I mean, I could be wrong. I don't recall that. I don't know how long ago they're saying, but the history amounts to a few Portuguese missionaries. I didn't hear about anything in this history about the Portuguese missionaries were there to take over. I guess you could argue the very act of missionary being a colonizer, which is kind of ridiculous, right? I guess you would have to prove to me somehow that these people were sent as sort of emissaries or something. But then you'd have to argue the entire history of missionaries throughout the world, and then like the papal states. And what my point here is, John, is they have no idea what they're talking about. They see Portuguese missionary and they're just like, colonizer. These guys were sent there to colonize, even though they were clearly just like there for the religious reasons. These are the people that are writing these stories, and they'd be better off just saying we completely made this up. We're sorry. We completely made this game up. We thought it'd be cool to have a black samurai, and we wanted to honor your culture. We got a bunch of stuff wrong. If there's stuff in the environment and the weather and the posture and the way people are sitting that we can get right, let us know. But I thought you guys worked with historians. I thought you guys worked with Japanese teams in Japan on this story. They just say things, John. I don't understand it. And they never face any criticism. They won't talk to you. They won't talk to me. They won't talk to Grums. They won't talk to Cabrutus. They won't talk to any of these people who have reached out to them. They just go and get articles written in Kotaku, or they talk to a person at IGN that recently was transitioned in their gender. They won't face any criticism head on. They just say, "Oh, we're sorry, but we're still kind of right."
I really like how you bring up the point here that they describe these Portuguese missionaries as colonizers, because I think that just really hits home the fact that they view themselves, or they view anyone kind of from the West, like even maybe trying to be friendly or peaceful or whatever, as evil. It doesn't matter what they're doing. If you're a Westerner going anywhere outside of the West, you're viewed as a colonizer, and that is so wrong, and it's so bad and so evil, and kind of reflects on just how what Ubisoft is as a company, that they chose to write it this way, and what their real aims and intentions are. And I think I'm just going to go back to this post again here. I really think that this is the case. I think Ubisoft is indeed trying to push globalization, push the DEI agenda onto Japan, and Japan finally said no. As you said, they met an opponent that would stand up to them, and they are now having to capitulate, at least on some points. And I think they're in for really rough shape. I've covered this a little bit. Their stock price plummeted 12% after their most recent sales report, which was just about a little over a week ago. Their stock price is actually down over 75% in the past 5 years. If the two games that they have coming out this year, Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows, which we're talking about now, do not do like banger numbers, this company is in very dire straits. Because if you go back and look at when Assassin's Creed Valhalla came out, I think it was 2020. In the quarter that it released, and again, there was a bunch of other things that released too at the same time, as like they had like the Just Dance 2021 and all these other kind of significant games, but they made over €1 billion in their net bookings, or in their sales. And after a year, the Assassin's Creed Valhalla had over 1 billion sales by itself alone. So that's a big bar, and we've already seen them kind of being evasive on that earnings report call there, where they were asked, like, is this going to be the best-selling Assassin's Creed game ever? And they said it will be one of the best performing games. So clearly, I think tempering investor expectations there, and I think investors reacted by selling as their stock price dropped like 12 percentage points immediately.
Well, let me ask you, if Outlaws fails, which I'm hoping it will, maybe I shouldn't hope. Maybe I should hope that it would be a great game and not be indicative of their
I think
square-faced
we've seen
woman.
enough to hope that it can fail. We've
Okay.
seen enough gameplay to see that we can hope that it fails.
If it fails, yeah, it looked pretty bad. If it fails, do you think they double down? And I will preface it with Warner Brothers games. The Suicide Squad game that lost $200 million, I believe it was. What do they do? First order of business, lesbian Mrs. Freeze. So no lessons learned there. First order of business, start this new group for women and non-binary programmers. No lessons learned there. Keep throwing money on the fire for ideology. Outlaws fails, do you think they double down, or do you think they make some moves?
I don't think that Ubisoft is a company that can actually change. I think this ideology is so embedded within the company that they're kind of stuck on it, and they're going to have to double down. They're going to follow the SJW playbook. They're going to lie. They're going to double down on their lies, and they're going to continue to project, but they're going to be doing it from a corporate level. I just don't see them being able to course correct, because I just don't think they have the people there that have the will to do that. Their CEO and their co-founder, Yves Guillemot, doesn't seem to have his finger on the pulse of the video game market anymore, and I think he's leading the company down a very treacherous road here. And if they don't course correct, as I said, I think they like, we might not be talking about Ubisoft in the next 5 years anymore. They might not exist. They might be going the way of Volition. They might be going the way of Luminous, which we saw shut down, I think, last year.
I think it's important to talk about stuff like that, just as people maybe a little bit more in my world than yours talk about places like Vice and BuzzFeed News going under, because that was way more reliant on clicks and people rejecting that. There are still going to be people who are Assassin's Creed fans and Star Wars fans that buy these things anyways, just as there is predominantly with sports games get away with being crap a lot more. But I think it's important for people to talk about the companies that did go under, these studios that do go under because of this, because a lot of people lose hope. A lot of people think, well, how long will these terrible ideas and really backwards ideologies in terms of calling other people racist whilst being racist themselves, how long can these things last? How long will these ideas continue to last? And is there any hope in the future for people? So I think that it's important to point out that these things do end up coming to fruition. And if Ubisoft continues down this line, then you're going to end up with a company, which a lot of these places do, where you don't actually know how to do anything. You're going to end up with a company where people don't actually know what they're doing. They just know how to spout out a few certain key lines, like let's make a samurai game featuring a black guy and a woman on the cover. That's about as far as the idea goes, and then they work backwards from there. So I do agree with you. I think they will double down, and their first DLC will be what? It'll be like obese purple haired girl comes to save the day in some manner like that. What's that new game? What's that futuristic shooter where
Oh,
everyone's an
Concord.
obese woman? Yeah,
Concord. Yeah.
that's going to be a good one. I can't wait to there's going to be an option in the game for your pronouns to appear over your head, I'm sure, like in game while you're playing online. That's going to be a good one.
Would not be surprised if that happens. But yeah, the Japanese people are finally saying no to this. I do think this is a good rallying call here for all of us gamers. We're all kind of uniting Ubisoft against Ubisoft right here. So I really do appreciate them taking the stand on this. Because this is stuff we've been talking about too, right? It's not just obviously staying true to history, but we also want people to stay true to the whether it's novels, anything that they're adapting that Hollywood has been absolutely destroying. I mean, obviously, Lord of the Rings, I think Star Wars is that case. Obviously, they're not adapting Star Wars, but they're clearly just moving away from the original vision of that. And that's something that we've been talking about here for a number of years now. And it seems to be a growing movement to oppose a lot of this stuff because people are waking up to it, realizing just how poisonous and evil it is.
They will not stop. What it comes down to is they're basing everything off of an ideology that the history of the Western world is evil and therefore should be wiped out because they're suffering. There's some sort of permanent underclass and they need to rebel against the bourgeoisie that I get, even though they work for like a huge gaming company. It's a really weird lifestyle to have where you're a writer for a mainstream video game studio at Ubisoft or Activision or something like this, and you really need to rebel against the culture and feature these storylines and these characters in it. It's a delusion, and it does need to be fought against. And I believe we are winning, the collective of anti woke gamers.
Right, and they're obviously trying to export this ideology to Japan. I think that's kind of where at least where I've settled on after this discussion here. And Japan is saying no and saying no vehemently, and even bringing the levers of their government against that. So I think that is a really good thing to do. So I think we'll wrap it up here. Where can folks find you, Andrew?
Well, I write on theblaze.com every day. And then also you can find me on my YouTube channel, Andrew Says. And my podcast, you can just go to Andrew Says TV. You'll find me, Unauthorized Opinions Podcast and The Blaze. And Andrew Says is the easiest thing to type in, I think.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We look forward to having you back again soon.
All right. Talk to you later.